So this is part one of my Morningstar recap. This is the third book in the initial Red Rising trilogy, the final part of the initial trilogy before the time hop and the next set of books. And yes, very filled with spoilers. So the end of book two was pretty brutal. At Darrow's triumph, which is this event where he's supposed to be presented with this mask of honor or something like that, in the box, instead of the mask, it's Fitchner's head. So Ares is dead. And then Darrow realizes Rogue knows and the Jackal know that he's been betraying them, and they incapacitate him. The Jackal kills Augustus. We also see Victra getting taken down. So not good things. So book three starts with Darrow being in this cramped, what we think is some sort of concrete cell that's barely wide enough and not long enough for Darrow to be in. So he's all cramped in there. We know he hasn't been out of there for a while because he has feeding tubes in his stomach, and he also alludes to have been tortured before he went in there. So it turns out that putting Darrow in some windowless cell is not psychotic enough for the Jackal, so Darrow's actually been inside of the Jackal's dining room table for 8 months. So he's been hearing voices and hearing little noises, and that's been people just eating above him while he's in this tomb, basically. So Darrow gets pulled out of this table prison, and he hears Cassius and Aja, and Cassius seems a little uncomfortable with the conditions that Darrow's been in. The Jackal's not upset at all. He's pretty proud of it. And we basically get the gist that the Jackal has held on to Darrow long enough, and now he's trading him back to the Sovereign, who's gonna want to use him in these experiments to figure out exactly how the Reds were able to infiltrate the Golds by, carving Darrow. So just to clarify the timeline, he was tortured for 4 months before being put in this table prison for 8 months. So for a year, he's been held by the Jackal, and he's also been, psychologically tormented too. He thinks the Jackal has his family and has been torturing his whole family this whole time as well. So as Darrow is being prepped for transport and cleaned up and everything, it turns out that the people transporting him are some Greys who are working for the Rising, working under the new Ares, aka Severo, who's taken up the mantle of his father. So Holiday and Trig are the two fake guards who are transporting Darrow, and long story short, as they're taking Darrow out, he realizes that Victra is still alive, so he forces them to rescue Victra as well. But unfortunately, as they're escaping, Holiday's brother Trig gets gunned down by Aja. So yeah, Darrow, Holiday, and Victra escape the Jackal. So it turns out Darrow's family's totally fine. So it turns out that everybody thought he was dead. The Golds brought up a decoy who looked like him and executed him for everyone to see. So even his family had basically given up on him. Severo's the only one who didn't believe it. So the Sons of Ares base called Tinos is in this hollowed out cave or something. And they're housing a lot of Reds. And it's basically these slum towns of Reds who have been taken from mines that the Jackal was going to pump full of gas and execute. There's definitely infighting and issues. So while Severo is here, leading this movement, it's clear that it's going kind of rough. And yes, Darrow's uncle is alive. Some good news though, Dancer's actually alive. Harmony lied when she said he was dead. She actually broke off from him and started her own movement that basically is just bombing Golds all over the place, and it's really harming the Red movement because all kinds of people are getting hurt in these blasts, and it gives the Golds an opportunity to just portray the Reds as terrorists. So Darrow's wondering how things went from the kind of golds on gold civil war he was starting to actual society level conflict. And it turns out Severo had leaked the footage of Darrow's carving. And Darrow's realizing Severo's been pretty impulsive with things. Fun fact, Severo has Darrow's old eyes. So yeah, fuck that bitch Harmony. I never liked her anyway. She betrayed Darrow. That's how the Jackal found out that Darrow is not a true Gold. So it's important to note he has taken massive hits mentally and physically during his captivity, obviously, right? So a carver gets brought in, Mickey gets brought in to kind of tune up Darrow and Victra. So they get their bodies back on track over the course of a few months. But it's the mental aspect that's going to take a little longer. Darrow was, top dog. He was feeling himself. He was pretty cocky, and we love that for him. But he has definitely been humbled. And you can definitely feel this through how he does not immediately take up the mantle back from Severo. He lets Severo stay in the lead because he doesn't have that self-confidence or even trust himself to, you know, lead all these people again. So there's basically this time period where Victra and Darrow are kind of like earning their keep. They're going on like small little missions, and then they eventually earn their wolf cloaks, and they get to be like part of the Howlers again. There's this weird hazing, like psychedelic mushrooms and eating snakes and beetles. You wouldn't expect anything different from Severo. Also, just fun to mention, Ragnar is fitting right in. People love him. He's becoming like his own legend among their people. So as Darrow and Victra start getting pulled into more important missions, Darrow starts to really question if the Sons are a movement or if they're more like saboteurs or terrorists. But he still lets Severo keep leading. So Darrow taking a backseat is coming close to an end here when he and Victra are able to go on a big boy mission with Severo involving Quicksilver. So Quicksilver is a silver who's like omega level fucking rich. Like he is, you know, rubbing shoulders with golds all the time. So it's pretty easy for people to assume him and his, you know, enterprise are helping the gold cause. So that's why Severo wants to target him. I'm gonna try and simplify the mission a little bit. It's more complicated than this, but basically Severo wants to kidnap Quicksilver and also like bomb a bunch of his like industry. This is where Darrow really starts to question things. This seems like a really rash plan, especially the part that involving the bombs. They're talking to Reds who work in these like buildings and enterprises, part of which is Julie Industries, Victra's, you know, family. And Darrow's starting to think like, if we bomb this, aren't we hurting the Reds more? Like they're the ones who work here. Like we're taking their livelihood away from them. Is this the smartest way to go? Severo doesn't want to hear it. There's some squabbling back and forth, and Severo kind of like keeps pulling rank on Darrow. Also along the way, Darrow's talking to this Red, and he's basically telling Darrow, because it's starting to leak that Darrow is alive, and so there's like rumblings along the low color communities that like, oh shit, like Darrow's alive, and he's like this like messiah to them at this point. But he's telling him like, hey, you have a movement behind you, like there are millions of Reds who can like take stuff down from the inside out. Like I've built mech suits, I can take them apart in 8 seconds and turn them into a weapon. Like they are this resource that could be taken advantage of, but so far Severo was not leaning into that. So they're doing this mission, and they're going to get Quicksilver, and Darrow feels like something is not right, and he tries to tell Severo, and Severo's not listening, and then they bust into this room. And it's like this oh shit moment because Quicksilver's there, but he's there with Mustang, with Cassius, with Pax's family, and they're having like this meeting all together. Oh yeah, important to note, Severo and Darrow and all of them are like suited up, so the other people don't know who they are. And the gist of the conversation they're having seems to be some sort of peace talk with the Sovereign to like end the like gold on gold kind of like civil war happening. Darrow sees this and wants to be able to talk to these people, especially Mustang, who he cares about. Severo wants to just go guns blazing. And all shit breaks loose, and we need part 4. Okay, yeah, so before they walked in on this Quicksilver meeting, they'd actually gone to Quicksilver's bedroom and found out a pink was in there, and like Severo had started roughing him up, and it turns out it was Mateo, who, you know, trained up Darrow in book 1. And so, you know, this is another thing that adds to Darrow's discomfort with how Severo's running things, with how quick he was able to just start brutalizing this low color and wanting to like torture him and stuff. But anyway, they knock him out, and they're like dragging him along with them, and then that's when they interrupt the meeting. So yeah, Darrow wants to try and speak to people, but Severo's like, light these bitches up. So razors are blazing, guns are blazing, fighting's going on. Long story short, and it is pretty badass, you should go back and read it. Cassius slips away. Darrow like opens his mask, and it's what makes Mustang stop fighting him. She's like, oh my god, he's alive. So yeah, people start fleeing, but they hold on to Cavix as a hostage, and Mustang is like, please don't kill him, and she slips out. So they have Cavix and they have Quicksilver. Oh yeah, and as she was slipping away, Mustang tells Darrow, I have the Pax, his ship, and Orion is still alive. So there's some fighting, like a power struggle between Darrow and Severo, because Severo had cut Darrow's comms when he tried to de-escalate. He's also learning from Cavix that Mustang and them had tried to make contact with them before, and Severo had shut that down. So security's almost upon them. They need to get out of here. Severo wants them to like fight through all the people, but Darrow has this crazy idea to like shoot the viewport and like flow down into space and hope that Holiday can scoop them up. Gee, I guess which one they end up doing. So after being bloated popsicles in space, after going through the viewport, they do get rescued and brought onto the ship. And also, yeah, way too many people saw that Darrow's still alive now, so that can't really be kept under wraps anymore. So Darrow talks to Cavix, and he learns, like, Mustang was not going to betray him. She knew he was a red, and she's still on his side. Like, Orion is still running the packs, and she kept all the low colors and everyone, so she is on his side. And this makes Darrow, like, pretty upset that Severo was, like, unwilling to bring her into the fold. And he also learns, like, Severo's missed out on a lot of allies because of how, like, rash he's been. Like, people have seen him and the way he's leading the Suns as, like, reckless and, like, a losing bet to go behind. But now that Darrow is back, people have more confidence in him, and there's these, like, feelings of alliances that could be coming, building up. Also, Severo just wants to leave the planet now, but Darrow wants to stay and try and, like, defend the Reds, because if they don't, the Jackal's definitely just gonna, like, nuke this planet and kill them all. So now Darrow goes with Severo to talk to Quicksilver, and we learn that Quicksilver was a founding member of Ares all along, and he knew Severo's father. Yeah, Darrow and Severo are trying to digest this, like, bombshell information that Quicksilver is a founding member of Sons of Ares. Severo doesn't believe it for a second. He's like, absolutely not, prove it. And you know, Quicksilver's like, bet. Like, he's able to describe, like, down to the schematics how the base where they're keeping all the Reds was created. And so he makes it very clear he really is a founding member, and he's been, like, a major part of the movement from the very beginning. He also has this kind of, like, tough love, like, reality check for Severo, where he says, you know, he didn't come out and support them because it seemed like a losing battle. Like, Severo basically seemed like this, like, kid having a tantrum, running things and just, like, sabotaging and bombing stuff with no vision. He seemed like a losing horse to bet on. And you can kind of feel things shift between Severo and Darrow, and then they run off and have a very dramatic kind of, like, confrontation, where Severo has, like, this bomb detonator and he's gonna detonate it. Darrow stops him. They have their scuffle. They basically have, like, their little, like, man makeup session where they beat each other up and dust each other off, and then they're like, what are we doing? Like, we're friends. Like, we're supposed to be able to talk to each other. That's why we work. That's why we're strong. So they come out to their friends, and they can all tell, like, they've kind of made up. Darrow's like, Howler number 1, Howler number 2, pointing to Severo. So, you know, order has been restored. So now that Darrow is leading again, like, Quicksilver's on board, and like, more players are coming on board for their cause. Darrow and Severo call up the Jackal and basically make, like, these ridiculous demands he was never going to agree to anyway, and it's all kind of a ruse to get the Jackal to send a bunch of people to them, because they're going to wreck their ship, basically. So it's time to get the Rising back on track. So instead of bombing all these, like, high-tech buildings with all this, like, equipment and whatnot in it, they rally the low colors and have them take over these buildings and, you know, loot them, get all the stuff they need in the ships and whatnot. This broadcast gets sent out basically telling the low colors to, like, claim what's yours, break the chains, and they start this, like, revolution. This was all happening on Phobos, by the way, the moon. So all of these rich golds are, like, panicking and fleeing, and during that, Quicksilver gives Darrow and co. his, like, pleasure cruiser space yacht, to use and escape as if they're one of these, like, gold, you know, families trying to run away. But instead of, you know, running with the crowd, they hatch a plan to visit Ragnar's homeland. And just when they're about to leave for this mission, Mustang shows up, and everybody's like, what the hell? And then Ragnar's like, hey, Mustang! Like, he called her over. And while Darrow's mad, like, he's not really mad. So yeah, Mustang crashes their party, and she guesses exactly where they're gonna go. People really don't trust her except for Darrow and Ragnar, but she is gonna tag along. So while Holiday, Ragnar, Darrow, and Mustang are going to the Obsidian planet, Severo and Victra and the rest of the Suns are taking care of those people that the jackal sent to Phobos. So their plan there was to lure them in and then use the suns and also this like uprising of low colors to take over all of their ships that they're going to land there, so that Darrow will have ships to be able to transport out the Reds who are stranded on that moon, and also have ships to bring back the Obsidians that hopefully Darrow is going to be able to rally from Ragnar's home planet. On their way there, they're pursued by a ship that ends up having Cassius and Aja on it. They shoot down Darrow's ship, and as it's going down, Ragnar shoots like a missile launcher at them and downs their ship. It's just, Ragnar's amazing. So after escaping sea creatures and cannibals, they end up coming upon Cassius's group. There's some debate over confronting them, but Ragnar really wants to, and Darrow asks if he can take on Aja, and he says yes. So fighting breaks out. Mustang incapacitates Cassius by shooting an arrow like through his neck. He's not dead, but he is down. And then we're watching Ragnar fight Aja, and Darrow remembers Lorne telling him, don't fight a river and don't fight Aja, and we're seeing exactly why. Aja is just too good with the razor, so she ends up slicing Ragnar across his middle and then stabs him in the gut like a piece of shit. So he's slowly bleeding out while she goes and jumps down into an ice hole. So as Ragnar's bleeding out on the ice, we see his sister Sephi and her griffin riders show up. So they're this great force of warriors. They show up. The sister walks to Ragnar, and it's, God, it's like losing Pax, but so much worse, because you really have gotten to know Ragnar by this point, and just the way he's talking to her, it's so just like you can tell how much he like loves Darrow. And he really cares about this cause, and he wants, Sephi to fight for more. So Ragnar dies with his friends around him, as he says with his own words. So it was an assumption before going on this mission that the Obsidians were unaware that the Golds were lying to them about being gods and hiding that Obsidians turn into slaves when they leave the planet. So while it turns out not all of the Obsidians were aware of this, Darrow realizes that Ragnar's mother does know already. I really need to start wrapping these up, so I'm just going to skip ahead and tell you Sephi cuts her own mother's head off, and now we have the Obsidian force we need, led by Sephi, to join the cause. So they take the Obsidians and go back to Tennos. Rest in peace, Ragnar, and on to part 7. So we know Darrow was successful in bringing the Obsidians over to his cause, and then Severo and Victor's side of the mission, which was, acquiring ships from the Golds that the Jackal had sent their way on Phobos, was also successful, and they barely even needed to lift a finger. Quicksilver hacked into the PA system of the ships and gave the whole spiel about overtaking the Golds, and there was mutiny on the ships. All the low colors were overtaking them, so you really start to feel like there is momentum for their cause now. So remember, they also have Cassius in custody, so he asked to speak to Darrow. And if you remember, during the discussion with Quicksilver, notably the Jackal was not there. And so Darrow starts to piece together, why is the Sovereign trying to, cut the Jackal out of plans, or what's got her worried, and Cassius has some stuff to say about that. So first of all, the Jackal is skimming helium mine data, basically saying mines were shut down or not producing as much as they really are. So he's stockpiling helium, and they think it's because he's buying senators and buying political power. But the scarier thing is that he also apparently raided this deep space asteroid, whatever, that was holding nuclear bombs. So that is very concerning. And Cassius didn't even fully know. He just knew this went missing. They thought it was the Sons of Ares who did the raid. And then Darrow's no, he didn't. So it's gotta be the Jackal. Also, to keep up with the romantic subplots, Severo was definitely climbing Victor like a tree. And then when they're talking about these 500 nuclear warheads, apparently it is, which is world-killing capacity, Darrow's why does this even exist? And if you remember, the Sovereign is the son of the Ash Lord, and he's called that because he nuked Rhea, the moon, into oblivion, just like that. And Cassie's well, it's the Ash Lord stockpile if that ever had to happen again. And Darrow's this is who you're serving? Someone who has a world-killing stockpile just in case? And this is going to be very important coming up. So what started out as a Bellona versus Augustus, inner gold fighting, Civil War has now turned into a bigger issue of like the inner like core golds and the moon lords who live on like the rim of the like system. And so the sovereign has sent Rogue to go speak to the moon lords and get them to heal. And so Darrow has the idea to go talk to the moon lords and try and actually get them on their side instead. So Darrow promises in 40 days we're going to destroy the Sword Armada and rip the beating heart out of the Society's war machine. We'll see if he can do it. Okay, so Darrow is visiting with the Moon Lord Romulus, and just to kind of remind you guys, on the rim, these golds out here think of themselves as more like iron golds, like tougher, less immature, less like flouncy with society type of thing. So they don't really necessarily feel like aligning themselves with golds no matter what. Like, because you would think, why would these golds want to align with someone they know isn't a true gold? And it's, well, they don't feel loyalty to the sovereign whose father bombed one of their moons, you know? So that's kind of like an in. So they get there. I'm going to speed through some stuff. Basically, Rogue is there as well. But this is kind of like a no violence zone, so they can't just fight each other there. And they both like plead their case to the Ash Lord. And Rogue starts out trying to like plead to him, and then he switches to threatening him. And then it's Darrow's turn. And, you know, long story short, Darrow pulls the trump card of revealing what he learned from Cassius, what I mentioned in my last video, that stockpile of warheads. And even though he's leaving out that, like, the Jackal stole it, it's just the existence that matters. And Rogue is, like, you know, a man of honor, so he's not going to lie that it exists, but the damage is done just by acknowledging that it's there. Even if they were never going to use it, the Moon Lords at that point, like, he, like, he bites his hand and, like, spits the blood in Rogue's face, like, that's that. And Darrow has the Moon Lords in the palm of his hand now. All right, now we get into more Space War, and I'm gonna try and kind of speed through some things and just give you the key highlights. But basically, the mass of ships that Rogue is at the helm of is called the Sword Armada. And Rogue also is basically like goated at Space War. He's incredible at it. There's this poeticness to the fighting or whatever. He's like a genius at it. He has never been defeated once. But this is Darrow we're talking about, right? So he concocts a plan. He basically sacrifices the Pax, knowing it's going to get all shredded and everything and create all this like space debris and shrapnel. And then he has a bunch of Helldiver Reds with him pilot like modified drills that are like little ships. And the, you know, tech on Rogue's ships can't discern between what's shrapnel and what's these like ships. And so they use those to like drill into the Sword Armada. And that's how Darrow finds himself on Rogue's ship with him. And now we're going to see some poetic justice in part 9. Okay, so Darrow and co are taking on the Sword Armada, and he's, you know, got his little, like, Helldiver plan. Also, the Obsidians are with him, and they have this stuff called God's Bread, which is basically, like, doing mushrooms or, like, acid, and they get high and they can't really feel pain, and they, like, go berserk on people. So that is terrifying, but working in their favor. Darrow also has several lying in wait, purposefully like away from the fight while all this is happening too. So he's kind of lulling Rogue into like a false sense of security. So Darrow actually ends up getting into like the command center of Rogue's ship because a low color opens the door for him. It was going to take a lot longer to get there, but as you can see, like his movement is really gaining, and even on Rogue's ship itself he has support. So Rogue turns around, sees him, there's like Beethoven blasting, and there's this really kind of like surreal moment of them facing each other and knowing one of them's gonna die here. And it's not going to be Darrow, because Darrow shows his trump card of having several out there with all of his ships, so Rogue knows this is the end, and he knows he's not going to make it out alive. Like, Darrow doesn't want to kill him, he still has this like kinship to him, but Rogue is so tied to who he is as a gold and his honor, what he thinks is his honor and pride and whatnot. Like, he's never lost, you know, these space fightings, and so he'll be like shamed if he stays alive. So he ends up taking his own life, and that's the end of our poet. So now that Rogue is dead, Darrow makes a very kind of like 5D chess decision to not spread word that he's dead yet, and to take Rogue's ship, which everybody else thinks Darrow hasn't quite made it into that room yet, and point its guns at the Moon Lord's shipyards. So the Moon Lord he just made a deal with, they have all these shipyards that Darrow knows eventually he would use to turn on him. Like, it's not like Darrow and him are friends. Like, Darrow had to give up a bunch of the Sons of Ares on the moon to get him to work with him. So Darrow behind the scenes has like evacuated as much of them as he could, but he can't evacuate all of them, and he shoots this shipyard. So it's gonna take the Moon Lords a while to be able to retaliate. And they don't know for sure Darrow did it, because Darrow tells them, like, I was trying to get to Rogue, I couldn't stop him, but it's like, they're not stupid, you know, but you can't outright call him out. So only Darrow and his like very inner circle know it was Darrow's decision to do that. That's very important to keep in mind for the future. So now Darrow holds like a very private little funeral for Rogue, and he also actually invites Cassius to pay respects as well. So Darrow just crushed the Sword Armada. Rogue is dead now, and so he's having like a very private little kind of funeral for him, and he brings in Cassius in cuffs, and they kind of have this like, you know, kind of truce moment. And Darrow shows Cassius like Rogue had all these tapes back from when they were at the Institute, and they've been watching them together, and it's kind of bittersweet because you're like, they were such good friends. Like, if circumstances were different, things could have been different, and they kind of talk about that a little. And then Cassius is like, when is this war over? And Darrow is like, when there's no colors. And then Cassius is like, well, you're aiming low. But then he's like, what about the one between us? And Darrow's like, till one heart beats no more, and Cassius is like, oh, you remembered, because that's what he had told him. And then Cassius kind of talks about how, you know, they bring the thunder and the lightning, like they are men made for this kind of conflict. And so you kind of have this kind of like melancholy feeling of like, are they maybe gonna be able to put differences aside and work together again? I certainly wanted them to. There's also a little foreshadowing nugget in their conversation where Darrow brings up how he can tell Mustang's like evaluating him for something. We learn what that is at the end of the book. And they kind of end their conversation talking about how they are both tired of this war, but it's like for, you know, these people who need them to fight for them, is what Darrow says. And then Cassius is like, man, I wish it was easier to hate you. And then Darrow leaves him with a hollow cube, which, you know, must feel pretty nostalgic for Cassius. Long story short, the holocube is of the Sovereign slaughtering Cassius's family, which to this point, he thought Darrow and the Sons were responsible for that. And I think we don't get that revealed till later, but just so you know now. Okay, so Darrow is waking up next being told that Victra has engaged Antonia in battle. And then they get a message shortly after where she's basically like, bitch is captured, Cavix is okay, victory's mine. And so now she has her ship, the Pandora, back under her control. Also, Victra is like the rightful heir to the Julie like empire, and because she defeated Antonia, she now has like her own whole fleet of ships and stuff. And so now there's a little bit of like hesitancy amongst like Darrow's inner circle of like, okay, well now you have all this power to yourself, are you still going to be with us? And she says she is, but you know, we'll see. So they have Thistle, who used to be a howler and then dipped when they found out Darrow was a gold, and she's like trying to apologize and everything, but you know, doesn't matter now. And then also Antonia and Acel, and they're waiting for both of them to give information on the Jackal. So Antonia reaches through the bars and just like crunches Thistle's head into the bars until she dies, so that Antonia is the only one with the information. Also, we learned Sevro and Victra are not a thing anymore because Sevro said he loved Victra, and I think it spooked her. Okay, so Antonia spills some information about the Jackal, but we don't really know if we can trust it or not. And then Mustang concocts some sort of plan, but we as the reader don't know the full details of the plan yet. Also, Darrow and Holiday are kind of talking about, you know, their past traumas, and we hear that Trigg's fiance was Ephraim, who we are definitely going to see more of in the next book. So just keep that in mind. Trigg was his fiance. So Darrow gets a transmission from the Jackal, and it looks like it's being broadcast all over, and he has Darrow's uncle Gnarl, and he kills him. And this is obviously super fucked for Darrow and super sad for us, but it's also really bad for the resistance of like this fragile kind of like kinship that the low colors have had with some of the golds on Darrow's side. It's really hard to keep the low colors in check when you just see a gold murder one of the most prominent like reds in their resistance right now. We also see that Sephi, the leader of the Obsidians, is storming the prison, which is holding Cassius. So they've got Cassius all carved up and they're about to kill him, and then Severo shows up in his Ares attire and he's like, that one's mine. And he also calls an Obsidian an albino sack of pubic hair, which I thought I just had to share. So anyway, he kind of has his like Darrow moment when he's like, he's a murderer, what do we do to murderers? And he knocks him off the platform and he starts like hanging by his neck and like asking for air. And he's like, and I am Severo and I've killed blah, 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 and what do we do to murderers? And he jumps off and starts hanging himself. And they swing together, the goblin and the gold. Sephi can't let Severo die, so she cuts his cord, and then by Severo's own logic, you can't save him and not save Cassius, so she cuts his as well. And then Severo's kind of able to like simmer down things by bringing up the point that like his father's dead, Darrow's wife is dead, but they shared this dream and they can't build it on vengeance alone, they have to build it on something more. And I know you don't need to know this either, but afterwards Severo and Victra are like, you idiot, like you could have hung yourself, and Victra's like, 10 more kilos and you would have snapped your own neck. And then Severo's like, good thing I took a shit before. And then Victra proposed to Severo. It's just so perfect. God, I'm such a loser, but reading about their little wedding almost makes me like emotional because it's like there's so much shit and all this terribleness going on, but they get married and it's so sweet. And then Victra takes Severo's last name. And then the jackal calls. Instead of talking about what their dialogue was, it's just some like back and forth. I want to mention, if this is your reread, you might catch that even though Darrow says he's millions of kilometers away, the delay is only 6 seconds. Whereas the last time the jackal sent him a correspondence, the delay was 3 weeks. So there's some screwery going on, and we're going to find out what that is in the next part. So instead of going to Mars, as Darrow has said often and loudly, he's actually going to Luna. And he is going to like the Sovereign's base, which nobody has even gotten close to in the last 500 years. But because of all, you know, the chaos and then also throwing people off of his trail, he's able to get in there. So yeah, Darrow has this whole red armada going there. They've also painted like a giant red Reaper's scythe on the side of their ship, which is super badass. War has come to the core and they are not prepared. And then Darrow orchestrates for Cassius to escape from his ship in like a smaller ship. Orion flags it and Darrow's like, oh no, he needs to, you know, get off the ship for his own safety. Okay, Pierce Brown, I know you're scheming, but we'll get more into that later. So Darrow and Mustang and Severo go down to the cell that Cassius is being held in, which is next to Antonia, and are like talking to him about letting him be released. He's super surprised they're attacking Luna, super surprised they even want to let him out, and Antonia's kind of like eating this all up too. So Cassius swears not to raise arms against them, so they open the cell, and Severo goes to like shake Cassius's hand, and Cassius is saying like, sorry that your father's gone, blah, blah, blah. And then he won't let go of Severo's hand, and Darrow's like, oh my god, something's not right. And Cassius like basically takes Severo's gun, shoots him in the shoulder, and then like shoots him a bunch of times. And everyone's like, no, oh my god. And then when I was reading this, I was like, no fucking way, and freaking out and so mad and crying over this goddamn goblin that I've gotten attached to. But since this is a recap, we all know, fuck you, Pierce Brown, for doing that to our emotions, but also thank you, because no, Severo's not really dead. They're straight up scheming. And Antonia is there eating it all up. So Cassius goes to kill Darrow, and Mustang's like, no, the Sovereign would want him alive. And then Cassius lets Antonia out of her cell, and they're basically gonna like take Darrow and Severo to the Sovereign, which is exactly what they want them to do. So Cassius and Antonia escape with their prisoners on that ship that Darrow had cleared with Orion. So then Cassius patches through to Aja, and he says he's got Mustang, he's got Darrow, and he's got the body of Ares. And she's like, holy shit, you've done it. And then she also mentions that the jackal is there. And Cassius is like, whoa, the jackal's on Luna? And she's like, yeah, he knew Darrow wasn't ever going to go to Mars. This is his trap. But is it, though? We've got schemes on schemes here. So they land, and the Bone Riders take them in, and they're like preparing to chop off Darrow's hand. And then the jackal comes into view, and he has this like this bone armor on, and it turns out it's Fitchner's rib cage. He's so fucked. Okay, on to the last recap, I promise. So the Jackal evil monologues a little bit, and then Antonia gives him Severo's gun, and he kind of takes it as a trophy and puts it in his own holster. The Jackal has Cassius cut off Darrow's hand with a razor, and he does. The Sovereign sentences Antonia to death for abandoning Rogue, and then has Aja snap her neck. So she's dead. Later, bitch. So the Sovereign sets up a broadcast as she's getting ready to execute Darrow. She's spewing all this bullshit. And then the Jackal wants to do it himself. So he stands behind Darrow and takes out the gun he took from Severo's body and shoots Darrow to execute him when the Sovereign's done with her spiel. But there seems to just be like a blank in the barrel. And then he realizes something's wrong. And then the Sovereign looks up and sees one of the like knights or whatever behind the camera die, and then it's Cassius standing there. All this happens super fast. Cassius has like the controller to the restraints on Darrow and Mustang, and he releases them. Darrow grabs like a hidden blade that he had and stabs it into the Sovereign's stomach. So Cassius and Mustang are fighting Aja while Cassius throws Darrow a syringe, and he crawls over to Severo, stabs him in the chest, and Severo's like, fuck, and he wakes up and he's alive. And he's also like, where the fuck is your hand? So with Severo's help, they all surround Aja and like have a good little stabbing party. And then Severo chops off her head, and now Aja is dead. And the Sovereign is bleeding out, dying as well. Her grandson, Lysander, is there. He picks up a razor, tries to stop them from going to Octavia, but he knows and she knows and everybody knows that she is dead. And she looks to Cassius and asks why, and it's because of the hollow that Darrow had showed him, showing that she had killed Cassius's family and manipulated him. And then the Sovereign's dying words are, "You must stop Adrius," and then the Jackal starts cackling. It turns out the Jackal has all of those nukes hidden on Luna, and he has Lilith in his ear ready to start detonating. And just to show he's not fucking around, he has her detonate one, and 5 million people just die, just like that. They ask him what he wants, and he says he wants Darrow to kill himself. And Darrow says fuck that. He punches him, climbs over him, shoves his fist into the Jackal's mouth, and rips out his tongue. Lysander ends up piping up and says, contact the Ash Lord, he'll put a stop to this. And then he picks up the scepter off the ground, hands it to Mustang, and calls her their conqueror. So they hang the Jackal, and Mustang tells the Golds bend or break, and they do bend to her, so she's the new Sovereign now. So following everything, the Ash Lord retreats back to Mercury. Cassius says he can't stay, so he takes Lysander with him to be under his wing, but he does call Darrow brother again. So at the very end, Darrow and Mustang are on a beach, and he asks her if he's passed her tests. And the final reveal at the end of the book is that Darrow has a son.